Could everybody hear me? Could everybody hear me?
Yes, I can hear you.
Okay. Good morning, my dear friends. Good morning, my dear friends.
Good morning.
Journey. And I'm going to spotlight myself so that everybody could see me. And in the recording, it's going to be, good morning, everybody. We're studying Tanya. Tanya is a book of self-actualization. That's really what it is. A human being is put onto this world to work with their natural character traits that God gave them, to correct them, to fix them, to make them godly, to make them better. And it's really a lifelong journey. And this is the journey that all of us are on every single day, every single hour, and every single moment of our lives. The beauty about the Tanya is that unlike a regular self-help book that gives you tips and ideas to help you cut through the chaos, the Alter Rebbe in Tanya does something that's very unique. And what he does, he tells it to us actually in the title page of his Tanya. In the title page of the Tanya, he says that I'm here to teach you, to explain to you really the entire book that I'm going to teach you is really an explanation on the verse, Ki karov elecha davar ma'od beficha ubelvavcha lasotu, which means Moses tells the Jewish people right before he dies, he says, I just gave you the whole Torah. And it seems so complex. It seems so difficult to live as a Jew. It seems what's the word? So it really makes you have to deal with things that are not necessarily things that you want to do. It seems very suppressing. It suppresses your natural flow of your energy and your emotions. So Moses turns to the Jewish people and he says, you should know that this book, that this way of life, serving God, connecting with God is something that is not me'ever layami, across the ocean. It's not rechoikahi, it's not far from you. Rather, it's kikarov elecha, it's close to you, it's exceedingly near to you, in your heart, in your speech, to do it. And that is really the foundation of this book. The foundation of this book, the Alter Rebbe tells us, is I'm going to give you a systematic approach, a slow, considerate, and very, very meticulous way of how to go through the entire life cycle and how to work on yourself internally so that on the outside it shows. And I'm going to do this in a long, short way, not in a short, long way, in a long, short way. Because a short, long way is like most self-help books. They give you tips, they give you ideas, they give you ways to work on yourself. Alter Rebbe tells you this is not about tips, about tricks. It's not about taking a Tylenol to get rid of the pain. This is about really going down to the core, to the crux of the issue. It's about really reaching and touching your soul. And when you do that, you're going to be able to live from the inside out. So in chapter 1, the Alter Rebbe tells us that really he wants to know if perfection is really attainable. Is it possible to be perfect? Because sometimes you look at these self-help books, sometimes you even look at spiritual books, and it seems that the only way to connect to your spirituality and to God is by really disconnecting with your human psyche. And by doing so, you could become connected to God. And Alter Rebbe wants to know, is that the only way to connect to God? To really disconnect from who you are? To really lose touch with your identity? Is that really what it's all about? And Alter Rebbe tells us that, in fact, if you look through the to books of Jewish Torah study, to the Talmud and through others, we find really three personalities. And they are the Rasha, the Tzaddik, and the Beinoni. Let's start with the Tzaddik. A Tzaddik is somebody whose actions are always in line with God. That means the Tzaddik is always feeling what's right He's always doing what's right. He's thinking what's right. What's right, I mean, in line with God's will. That's what right is, in this sense of the word. And then there's a Rasha. A Rasha is somebody who his actions, his speech, his thoughts are always not in line with the way God wants them to be, the way that God created humanity. And then there's the Beinoni. The Beinoni is somebody who the Alter Rebbe can't figure out. He can't really figure it out. In chapter 1, he says that the Beinoni is it's not somebody who is middle, like half and half. But the truth is, the Alter Rebbe says that a tzaddik, a righteous person, is also not somebody who is mostly virtues and very little vices. And a Rasha is somebody who's mostly vices and little virtues, because the Torah tells us that God planted one tzaddik in every generation, only one, or very few. And the truth is that all of us are mostly virtues and very little vices. We all do good things. We all intend to try to be the best person we could be. So if that's the case, then really the world is full of tzaddikim. So the Alter Rebbe says, no. A tzaddik is somebody, obviously, who never commits even an iota of sin. In other words, there's no vice whatsoever. It's somebody who is completely in line with God's will, 24/7 a day, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, 365 days a year. A Rasha is somebody who constantly stumbles. But what is a Beinoni? A Beinoni is not a Rasha, and it's not a tzaddik, but it's not middle. So what is it? So Alter Rebbe tells us in chapter 1, he says, in order to understand all of this, we need to know this very basic Jewish idea that there are within each of us two souls, not one. It's not like we have one soul that has inclinations towards good and inclinations towards evil. That's the way everybody looks at life, but that's not the way that Kabbalah looks at life. Kabbalah tells us that every person has two souls, and the two souls are really two operating systems. What do I mean an operating system? I mean that the body, life could function on one of those souls completely, and it could function on one of those souls completely in the other realm. That means that every facet of your being, there are really two parts to it. In other words, you don't only have one need to do good and one need to do bad. It's more complex than that, Alter Rebbe says. He goes on to explain the first soul first. And the reason he explains that soul first is because that's the first soul that really comes into the person. As soon as a person is born, he has a soul. A physical being cannot function without a soul. So the soul, the natural soul, which is the soul that yearns, that looks for self-preservation, that wants to exist, that is a survival mechanism of the person, that's the first soul, and it comes first. And what is the purpose of that soul? What is that soul? What is the modus operandi of that soul, the MO? So Alter Rebbe tells us, you wouldn't think this, but Alter Rebbe tells us that the souls, from that soul stems the negative character traits within a human being, which stem from the four physical elements: fire, water, earth, and wind. And in the soul, in the character traits, already fire is anger, like hot-headedness. Wind is words of idle chatter, or just doing things that don't have any real meaning to them. Water is the source of all pleasure because it creates pleasure. And earth is the source of laziness, melancholy, heaviness. All of that comes from the first soul. But here's the chidush, here's the novelty. Not only do the negative character traits come from that first soul, also the positive character traits within a person come from that soul. Being kind to others, being merciful to others, being humble to others, that also comes from the first soul. So now I have to understand. Good character traits and negative character traits come from the first soul. So what does that leave us with? What does the second soul contribute? In other words, doing good in the world, not only doing bad in the world comes from the natural soul, the human soul, the animal soul. Also doing good in the world comes from the animal soul. Why? Because doing good in the world is also a expression of self-preservation, of survival in many ways. People could do good things because it makes them feel good. That's selfishness, right? Feeling good is my need. When it's about me, when it's about my need, it comes from the first soul. Being merciful to others, it could also be my need, right? In order to create a more perfect union, and like it says in the Constitution, in order to create a perfect society, a better society, people have to be kind to others. People have to be merciful to others. In other words, there is some kind of ulterior motive to doing good, to being kind, to being merciful, to being humble. There is an ulterior motive. Or just the fact that, hey, what goes around comes around. When I'm kind to others, they'll be kind to me. That's also a selfish, self-serving way of doing good. But it's all self-serving, and it's not bad. It's good, but it's self-serving. Anything that's self-serving comes from the first soul. Comes along the Alter Rebbe in chapter 2 and tells us that there is also a godly soul that is uniquely Jewish. Only a Jew has the soul. And the Alter Rebbe also tells us that there are some special people from the nations of the world that have this godly soul as well. And this is the ability for a Jew to rise above, to consciously rise above my self-serving needs, to do something that is beyond myself, to do something that I have no self-serving needs for. The only reason why I do it is for one reason, because God wants me to do it. And the way to know this is when I need to do a mitzvah, let's say to put on tefillin in the morning for a man, or to keep Shabbat, and there are obstacles in the way that are not letting me do it. I'm feeling sick, I'm feeling tired, I'm feeling burnt out, I'm feeling uninspired. There's no feeling that I'm not doing this because I'm getting anything from it. I'm not getting anything from it. I have no need to do it. I have no want to, I have no desire to do it. I'm not feeling inspired, and I do it anyway. That is uniquely Jewish. I'm doing it because this is what God wants. This is what connects me to God. You know, sometimes when you start on your journey of Judaism, it feels like an inspiring journey. And you start doing things and connecting to God, and it feels inspiring. You wake up every morning excited. You wake up every morning feeling good about it. God, that's a gift from God. That gift from God allows you to get into things. But at some point, that inspiration wears off. At some point, you wake up and you're not interested anymore. At some point, you wake up and you don't want, it doesn't talk to you anymore. Your godly soul, if you could tap into your godly soul, you could recognize that doing this is not about me at all. If it's about me, it makes me feel good. It's holy, it's godly. When you do something for God, it's certainly godly. But the difference between the godly soul and the animal soul is, am I doing it for my self-serving needs, or am I doing it because I want transcendence? Because the godly soul wants to transcend. It wants transcendence. It wants to go out of this self-need. That's the godly soul, and it's uniquely Jewish. And this godly soul is a piece of God, and it exists within every single Jew. And therefore, every Jew has within them this chelek elikam mimal mamash, a piece of God inside of them. That's very powerful. That tells us that we have the power at all times to do what God wants us to do. That tells us that we have infinite power, we have infinite abilities, we have infinite time, we have infinite patience, we have infinite ability to connect our godly souls with God. That's very powerful. That's very enlightening, and that gives us a lot of strength in being able to serve God and doing what God wants. In chapter 3, the Alter Rebbe starts to tell us that this godly soul, in fact, has an anatomy, it has a makeup. And the Alter Rebbe is going to tell us that both souls have this personality. And what is the personality of the soul? It's not just a glob of godliness. The personality of the soul has intellect and it has emotions. The soul has the ability to emote, emotional, and has the ability to cogitate, to involve itself in intellect. And there's the inspiration of the soul, chachma. There is the comprehension of the soul, bina. There is the focus of the soul, the intellectual intimacy, like we said in the last class, of the soul. There's the ability for the soul to love. There's the ability of the soul to give. There's the ability of the soul to create healthy boundaries. There's the ability of the soul to have a good balance between the two and be more, to be tiferes, to be beautiful. There's the ability of the soul to be competitive. There's the ability of the soul to be devoted, to be given over to a cause in a very devoted way. There's the ability of the soul to connect. There's the ability of the soul to have all of the above in some way or another. With Malchus, with Regal. That's the 10 attributes of the soul, the 10 building blocks of the soul. That is the anatomy of the soul, Alter Rebbe tells us. In chapter 4, the Alter Rebbe tells us that this soul, not only does it have a personality, not only is it able to connect with others, to cogitate, to emote, and each person on their own, every person has their own personality. Some people are more giving, some people are more disciplined. It also has the ability, in chapter 4, the Alter Rebbe tells us it has the ability to express itself to the outside world. In other words, not only is the personality within itself, it has the ability to express it. And it expresses it both to itself and it expresses it to others. What are the expressions of the soul? The expressions of the soul are thought, speech, and action. So thought is the expression, the way you express your personality, your ideas to yourself. Your seichel, your intellect expresses it to yourself through thought, through words of thought. The soul can express itself to others through words, and the soul could express itself to others through action. So there's thought, there's speech, and action. These are the expressions of the soul. And Alter Rebbe calls them garments. Why does he call them garments? Because garments, thank you, because garments are easy to take on and take off. And these expressions of the soul, thought, speech, and action, we have the ability to have impulse control. We can take them on or take them off at will. Thoughts that go through our head, we have control over. We don't have control over what goes through our head, but we have control over taking those thoughts and indulging in them, fantasizing about them. That's in our control. We have control over what we say. The words that come out of our mouth, we have control over. And we also have control over what we do. That's why Alter Rebbe calls them garments. Garments make a person beautiful. They express to others who I am, and they also are able to be taken off and on at will. And this is the key of Tanya. Who I am in chapter 3 is who I am. Who I am, I'm not in control over. That's God created me that way. So if I'm more kind, more giving, if I'm more disciplined, if I'm more of a loyal person, or if I'm more of a person that likes to connect to others, those personalities, God creates me with those. I have no control over them. God created me that way. That's my insights. But my outsides, the way I express myself in thought, speech, and action, that I do have control over. And this is going to tell us what the difference between a tzaddik, a rasha, and a beinoni is. I'm going to get to that soon. A tzaddik is somebody who has control over his insides and over his outsides. He has control over the impulses, the skeletons in his closet, right? He doesn't have any skeletons in his closet. All of his impulses, his proclivities towards doing whatever they may be, the fire that's going on inside of him is only godly fire. It's only good. He wakes up in the morning and has an impulse only to do God's will. And therefore, he expresses himself in thought, speech, and action in that way. The rasha is somebody who has negative impulses. His impulses are strong, fiery. He has lusts and cravings and sexual desires and needs, proclivities towards all sorts of negative behavior inside of him. And he allows that behavior to express itself in thought, speech, and action on the outside. So his outside is in line with his inside, but in a negative way. He's allowing himself to not have any impulse control. Whatever he thinks, he says. Whatever he's feeling inside, he does. That's a rasha. A rasha is somebody who allows that impulse to take foot in his physical, in his expressions of his soul, thought, speech, and action. His garments are, so to speak, dirty. His garments are not clean. They're not in line with God. And then there's the beinoni. The beinoni is the complicated figure that Dr. Rebbe is going to tell us we all can be, the possible man. What we strive for as a human being is to be a beinoni. What's a beinoni? A beinoni is somebody who wakes up in the morning and he has temptations. He has desires. When he sees something on the street, it invokes a fiery, flamey, negative response. He walks by the casino and he feels like he wants to gamble. He walks by a house of, God forbid, something that's sexually inappropriate, and he has that proclivity towards doing that thing. He sees something and he wants to act on it. He does something, he wants to feel it, right? He wants to speak about it. That is all normal, Alter Rebbe tells us. That's the key of Tanya. Alter Rebbe tells us, don't worry. If you have those impulses, you have those desires, you should know that you are normal. That is the way God created you. God created us all with temptations and impulses, and that's okay. Rebbe tells us that is okay. Alter Rebbe puts his hand on our shoulders, and he looks at us and he says, you should know that's not you. You didn't create that. God created it. God created you such with a heavy dose of immorality inside of you, or skeletons in your closet, or things that you want to do that you would never dream of doing, but they're inside of you and you feel disgusting. You wake up in the morning, you feel, how can I do a mitzvah when I feel like this? Alter Rebbe comes and tells you, this is the purpose of your creation. God wants you to be like this. You didn't create yourself like that. God created you with that. God created you with those impulses. God created you with that inside. You didn't create it. It's not you. But here's the key. What you do about those impulses, what you do about those negative cravings, what you do about it, that is up to you. If you choose to fantasize about it and allow yourself to indulge in your mind, in your thought, if you allow yourself to speak about it, and if you allow yourself to act on it, that is in your control. Your insides are not in your control. Your outsides, the way you express yourself, is in your control. And the first step that the Rebbe is going to give us is that every human being has natural impulse control that God gave them. Every person could decide what they're doing and how they're doing it. I remember as kids, we would sit on our computer and we would maybe do things that we shouldn't be doing. And then our mother comes into the room, and as soon as she comes into the room, we click the X, right? Why do we do that? Because our mother came into the room. because we have impulse control. God gave us that. But we can choose if we want to use that impulse control. So that's chapter 4. Chapter 4 is the garments of the soul. I already gave you more of the plot of Tanya down the road. But chapter 5 tells us that there is something that is greater and even deeper than doing a mitzvah with thought, speech, action. Something even greater than that. When you do a mitzvah, the Rebbe tells us in chapter 5, when you do a mitzvah, you indulge in a sacred, divine activity. When you do a mitzvah, you're connecting to God and you're uplifting yourself. But that experience remains, when you're finished with that experience remains. In other words, you had the good experience, and now you're done with the experience, and you move on. Your psychological and emotional self moves on to something else. That experience is the past. In order to get that experience again and to indulge in a cosmic and godly connection with God, you have to indulge in that experience again. So you have to continue doing mitzvahs. Mitzvahs are things that give you, so to speak, spiritual protection for the time you're doing them. They give you spiritual inspiration for the time you're doing them. But once you're done, you walk away and you're on to the next thing. That's a mitzvah. And it's beautiful. The mitzvahs you can do with the garments of your soul. Thought, speech, and action. You can think about words of Torah or ideas. You can speak ideas, and you can do. Mostly mitzvahs are with action. You can do them. You do the mitzvah. And when you do it, your hand becomes holy. When you do a mitzvah, if you do a tefillin, your hand becomes holy. If you do the mitzvah of going to shul, your feet become holy because you're walking. If you do the mitzvah of kibud avayim, your heart becomes holy, right? If you love God, your heart becomes holy. Different parts of your body becomes holy when you do different mitzvahs. That's why the mitzvah of tzedakah, even though you're doing it only with your hand, is the greatest mitzvah, charity. Because in order to get that coin, you have to invest all of your energies into it, right? You have to work with your mind, with your heart, with your soul. You sweat, your sweat and blood went into getting that coin. And now you take that coin and you give it to tzedakah, to charity, you're uplifting your whole being. But normally when you do a mitzvah, you're only connecting one part of your body with that mitzvah. So that's the mitzvah experience. But then there's the experience of studying of Torah. The Rebbe says this studying of Torah is not just a garment that protects you. When you study Torah, it's much deeper. The Rebbe says when you study Torah, you create a eternal connection with God that is not only you being invested in the activity. When you do a mitzvah, you're being invested in the activity, but the activity remains elusive. It doesn't invest itself back into you. When you study Torah, you are studying Torah, so your mind is invested in the thought, in the idea that you're studying, and the idea that you're studying comes into your mind as well. So in other words, when you study Torah, not only you are experiencing a spiritual activity of studying Torah, that spiritual activity goes into your psyche. It goes into you. So by a mitzvah, you go into it, but it doesn't go into you because it's an experience, a physical experience. But when you study Torah, you are invested in it, and it in turn becomes part of who you are. Not only that, you're able to connect to God in a way that's an eternal connection. Why is that? Because when you study Torah, as you study more and more Torah, that Torah knowledge comes into you and it starts to become part of who you are. It starts to shape the way you think, the way you look at the world. Your worldview changes. Because the Torah that's coming into you changes your whole perspective. And that's why the Rebbe, when he talks about mitzvot, when he talks about the garments of the soul, he talks about them in a way of garments. Garments you can take on and take off. You put on the experience of a mitzvah and then you take it off. It doesn't change who you are internally, only externally. Torah, when it goes into you, it changes you internally. And he calls it food for the soul. Why food? Because when you eat food, the food it's not just an experience that you eat and you had this good experience, right? Sometimes you have a beautiful dinner and it's a great experience. You walk away, wow, that was an amazing experience. That's like Torah, right? You had this amazing experience. You learned something so amazing and it totally took you to another place. Wow. But it does more than that. You're done eating the food. The food is ingested inside your body. And then the food becomes part of who you are, part of your flesh and blood, right? The Torah doesn't just remain elusive. The Torah goes into you, into your mind, and starts to percolate in your mind, and it becomes who you are. Not only that, it becomes part of your bodily experience, right? If I eat a lot of food over the weekend, you can start seeing it on my stomach. My stomach starts to grow. Hopefully, if I go to the gym, then I can burn off those calories. But that's what Torah does to you. Torah goes into you, and the Torah becomes your existence, becomes who you are. If you eat healthy, you have a healthy body. If you eat unhealthy, you start to have all sorts of health problems. You start to have things, growths in your body. Your mind doesn't work well. You can see it on the outside of your skin. The skin is not as good. That's what Torah is. When you put good things into your mind is sharp. Your body's sharp. Your soul is sharp. Because Torah is like food. Food is ingested in you and it becomes part of you. Torah is ingested in you and it becomes part of who you are. And it changes your worldview. So that's essentially chapter 5 of Tanya. And that concludes the study of the godly souls, the operating system called the godly soul. Next week in chapter 6, now Rebbe is going to start telling us that the other soul, the animal soul, also has an operating system. It also has the 10 building blocks. It also has the 3 garments of the soul. And when you indulge in them, they really become also they could change your outlook, the way you look at life in a negative way, not in a holy way. So stick around with us for chapter 6. Next week, we're going to do chapter 6. And when we do chapter 6, you'll start to understand that this is a two-sided battle. The most important thing to always remember is that God created us this way. He created us with this battle. And when you understand that, when you think about it, and when it becomes part of who you are, this idea, you never give up, even when the dark side starts to emerge, because you always know that this is God who created me such. My dear friends, I'm going to sign off. If you have any questions, you'll let me know. I want to thank you all for being here, for being part of this beautiful Tanya course. And God willing, next week we'll continue in chapter 6. I'm going to stop the recording, and if anybody wants any questions, we can continue with the questions.